Liz here. Today I'm going to be doing my mid-month wrap-up for January. I will be talking about the books I read so far for a Bookworm's New Year Readathon, a readathon created by Mindy, Noelle, David, and myself. I completed 5 of the prompts so far, so let's get to it. The first book that I read this year was The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This book fulfilled the top of your TBR prompt. I loved how this book was inspired by Jane Eyre, which is of course written by Charlotte Bronte. Our main character's name is Jane, and she's the dog walker to all the rich housewives in this really fancy gated community called Thornfield Estates in Birmingham, Alabama. She sees these women with their high-end things and she wishes to be like them. She's a bit of a kleptomaniac. She doesn't have any family or friends. Her emotional support system is just not there. She's struggled all her life, and so she can only rely on herself. She's broke and pretty desperate to try to find a way to fix her situation. So when opportunities present themselves, she doesn't hesitate to take it. In fact, she puts things in motion to essentially be on the fast track to elevate her status within this new group of affluent people that she sees on her dog walks. All the characters with major page time are all psychotic and manipulative. Our other main character's name is Eddie Rochester, and he is the widower to this really successful woman named Bee. Everyone is talking about the mysterious disappearance of Bee and her best friend, Blanche. So while Jane essentially tries to court and seduce Eddie, Eddie's wife, who may or may not be dead, sort of haunts the entirety of the book and gets in the way of their relationship, as Jane is super obsessed with knowing everything about Bee, and she sort of tries to emulate her. She probably does this unconsciously, but the whole time she sort of struggles with her identity. Jane tries to find out about the accident, but she doesn't want to seem too obvious, and she tries to play it cool. I flew through this book and I really enjoyed it. It was certainly a page turner and there's a lot of twists and turns, but I felt like it lacked in a lot of areas. I didn't like how fast her plan to weasel her way into Eddie's life was progressing. It was way too fast and therefore not as believable. I felt like this was all a game to Jane and she just wanted to see what would happen if she did this or if she did that. She's super impulsive and really juvenile for a 20-something-year-old, and her supposed shady past wasn't even all that shady. I thought this book was highly entertaining and the story had me pulled in, but some parts I thought were dumb. I didn't like any of the characters and I wish the ending was different. I gave this book 3 stars out of 5 stars. Then I read What Would Frida Do? A Guide to Living Boldly by Ariana Davis. So I read this book to knock out the New Beginnings prompt, and for this I had to read a debut novel, so I chose this, and it describes the life of Frida Kahlo while providing a guide on how to live your best life, similar to the way Kahlo led her life. She was a courageous feminist artist who created many paintings and is most well known for her self-portraits. People, including me, are enamored by her for a lot of reasons, but mostly because of how fiercely she embraced her image. Conventional beauty standards held no sway over her. She loved herself just the way she was, and that's something that's really powerful. Frida experienced a ton of pain throughout her life, and she poured all her suffering out onto canvas, and what resulted was something special and deeply personal to her as an artist and as someone who went through a lot of anguish and grief. That was just like amazing to read about. This was just a great outlet for her to channel all of these emotions. The thing that stuck out to me was an interaction that occurred between Frida and someone from the art world. I don't remember her name, but she came up to Frida and was like, "Oh, you're a surrealist." And Frida was like, "No, I just paint my reality." And to me, that's just like so profound and deep, and at the same time so sad, because her paintings are depictions of things that really happened to her. And although it is accurate to label her art as surrealism, because surrealism usually portrays things you would probably see in dreams or in nightmares. It's just worth noting that Frida's paintings are reflections of what she went through. And for her to say that she paints her reality, it just really makes it clear of all the hardships she went through. One of the ways she expressed herself was through her clothing and style, which was infused with her Mexican heritage. She wove flowers into her braided hair and loved vibrant colors. Her marriage to Diego Rivera was very rocky, but they loved each other, even though they both cheated on each other. It seemed that Diego cheated way more than Frida. At least Frida was discreet about it. Whereas Diego made his infidelities more public, which, probably embarrassed Frida. The book also highlights Frida's romances with other women, but in the end, her heart was always with Diego. Diego was twice her age, and they were both successful artists who were very political, and both of them possessed really strong opinions and were super involved with revolutionary things and events that were happening. Her legacy is apparent all over the world. Frida Kahlo has really left her mark with nearly 200 paintings, and everyone is still obsessed with her artwork, and what she stood for, even now, so many years after her death. Her life was not perfect, and I admire the way she carried herself, from her signature unibrow to her pet monkeys. There's so many things to learn from her, so what I've taken away from this book is to live boldly and to, most importantly, be myself, and also to be confident in everything that I do. So this is me trying to be confident. I hope it's working. I think the book would be way better if it included all the artwork that's talked about, because the author goes into detail describing each painting, but I was just bummed that I wasn't able to see it. I had to Google it if I grew desperate enough to see what she was talking about. I also noticed that the author would tend to repeat herself, and it became a tad bit redundant. This book is filled with a bunch of quotes, which is nice, but I think a better use of those pages could have been used for writing or for pictures of her portraits, and then the quote could be either above or under it. I think that would have made the reading experience way better, but overall I immensely enjoyed reading this book. If you are unfamiliar with Frida Kahlo's life story, then I highly recommend you pick this up. I gave this book 4 stars out of 5 stars. Then I read Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I read this book for the prompt Get It Done. This was the physical book that's been sitting on my shelves for the longest. So I finally read it, and I'm glad I did. This was published in 1985, and it takes place in the future, obviously. It's about genius children who go to battle school where they train to become commanders for the upcoming war with the alien race called the Buggers. For most of the book, it's really mysterious how previous battles happened, and when I was reading it, I was wondering if these battles were even real, because the adults seem to hide a lot of information about them. Our main character, whose name is Ender, is extremely young. He's only 6 years old when he goes to battle school, which is a school that's in space orbiting Earth. These kids train and train and train day in and day out, and the book goes into a lot of military stuff that I personally just wasn't that into. Their training included playing computer war games, competing in the battle room, and practicing formations. The kids endured a lot of grueling activities in order to prepare them for war. This book is very plot driven and doesn't do much with the characters, but Ender is a very deliberate and strategic person, and a lot of his challenges are very situation specific. So in a lot of ways, his character reminded me of the Martian, because they both had to come up with ways to survive that are not completely obvious. One of the main things he must suffer through his constant bullying, and him trying to find a way to deal with these types of situations, because he knows he can't rely on anyone but himself, especially since he doesn't receive any help from the adults. So in the very beginning of the book, I think it's in chapter 1, we learn how people see him, as he's thrown in the situation where he has to fight this bully, and during their fight, Ender continues to beat him further and further, not because he wants to, but because he wants to avoid all possible future fights with this person, with this bully. And those are the kind of issues that Ender faces, and they give rise to his identity crisis. Because he really wants to win not just his current engagement, but instill fear to win future engagements or battles. But he wants to be a very loving person, and he feels like he's forced to do these things. But he personally doesn't agree that the ends don't justify the means, so he kind of blames the adults for putting him in situations like that. In a lot of the scenes, it's the adults versus the kids, and it's one of those things that are not talked about. It just is, and it's something Ender has to deal with. There's another storyline that we follow down on Earth with his genius siblings, and I was laughing at how absurdly that storyline was unfolding, but it had that same theme of adults versus kids. The adults in charge of the battle school must find a balance in making sure that Ender is challenged enough, but at the same time, there's doubt about potentially ruining his potential by stunting him with challenges that could damage him long term. There's one instance in the book where the author talks badly about women, making them out to be inferior, and that just wasn't cool. But it didn't hinder my enjoyment of the book. I liked the positive message at the end, so I gave this book 4 stars out of 5 stars. Then I read A Sky Beyond the Storm by Sabaa Tahir. I read this for the prompt catch up. This was easily a book that I meant to read in 2020, but I just didn't have time to get to it. This is the 4th and final book to this series, and I'm so happy to have finally completed it. I enjoyed following our trio of characters as they each try to grapple with their own situations and figure out how to reach their ultimate goals. Leia is desperate to defend the scholars from the Nightbringer's plans. Alias is torn between his duty as a soul catcher and his old life. He has to deal with all the pressure that comes with keeping the dead in line and trying to untangle what his memories from his old life mean and if they outweigh what he's trying to accomplish. Helene protects the Empire no matter what the cost. She thinks the cost is too high, but she continues to pay. She continues to pay it with the lives of her loved ones. So that was pretty messed up. She's my favorite character from this series, and I'm like, seriously, can't you give her a break? I was kind of a bit disappointed with how the Nightbringer's decisions in this book unfolded. It just didn't align with his previous motivations, and I'm just a bit lost as to the sudden change in his thinking. It was just a total shift and it kind of caught me off guard, and it didn't make much sense. I guess I would have liked to see more of a payoff of certain character arcs. It had a good ending, but it wasn't the fantastic ending that I had expected. I would have preferred for the Commandant to have a different ending because I thought her ending was completely underwhelming. I liked how everything tied in and all the predictions by the augurs finally made sense. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I read Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. So I read this to fulfill the prompt No Time Like the Present. I was definitely intimidated by this book, and now I feel really accomplished that I've read it. This is the 4th book to the Stormlight archive. It took me a long time to read this. My roommates were like, "You're still not done?" And I'm like, dude, I have other books that I have to read. So now that I'm finally done, we can finally talk about it. So when I read the last page and I closed the book, I immediately went to my boyfriend and we were talking about it, and he was asking if I made this connection or if I caught this. And there's this one thing that he said that completely blew my mind because I didn't know, and I'm like, are you sure? And he was just like very adamant about it. So this is the type of book that's layered with a bunch of stuff. It weaves this intricate web and it's very complex. The thing my boyfriend told me has to do with an overlap of books in the Cosmere, and thinking about it now, it does make sense, and it just it's just really exciting to piece these things together. In this book, Navani and Raboniel get a lot of page time, and I loved hearing about all the scientific research that they were both doing. Just when I think one of them has the upper hand, the other one swoops in and is like, not so fast. Reading from Fenley's perspective was also interesting because we are already familiar with how things go down, so seeing it through her eyes was neat. I also liked how much development we got about the magic and the world, and we learn a lot about this through the interactions between Navani and Raboniel, and we got to see a lot of the things that bondsmiths could do. And we just got to see a lot more heralds in general. Usually heralds in the last 3 books were really minor, if not just a couple sentences about them, and they don't really do anything, or they're too mad to do anything. In this book, we got some pretty exciting stuff and interviews with them. The rest of the book is just so well done. We got to explore a lot about not just the Spren's past, like the why they feel so betrayed and why they hesitate to help out humans, but like we get to see that even though there's a lot more radiant Spren that can help out, that can come out, and they talked about the recreants, and then we learned more about Shallan's past and her dark secrets, and I thought that was really interesting. A lot of the characters go through PTSD, and the way that Sanderson handles mental illness in this book is just fantastic. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. These are the books that I've read so far this year. I'm really getting off to a great start, and I really like how this readathon is helping me tackle my never-ending TBR, and it's a really fun way to knock out some of my books that I wouldn't have immediately picked up. Hope you were able to participate. I can't wait to do other readathons this year. Let me know if you read any of these books and what you thought about them. Don't forget to like and subscribe. As always, thank you for watching. Bye!